As tobacco rates decline in Western countries, they're on the rise in China with no signs of slowing down. China consumes the most cigarettes in the world. According to a study published in the medical journal The Lancet, more than two-thirds of Chinese men smoke.
It is difficult because there's a lot of pressure at work, so I resort to smoking to alleviate the tension.
But all that lighting up is lessening lifespans. Unless today's smokers stop, eventually half of them will be killed by the habit. Right now, about 1 million people die in China from tobacco-related deaths. That number will double in the next 15 years and triple by 2050 if nothing changes.
I've tried replacing cigarettes with other things, but at the same time, our country does not have good treatment for people who try to quit.
Public health officials are concerned about the rise in smoking-related diseases they say are wholly preventable.
In China, every year 1 million Chinese die from tobacco-related diseases. And this number is going to rise to 3 million in the next 10, 20 years. So it is in the interest of the Chinese government and also in keeping with the healthcare reform to gear up on the prevention, to reduce tobacco demand, to make it expensive for people to buy tobacco. So increasing tobacco tax is very effective.
The Chinese government has already started to tackle the problem. To combat tobacco use, Beijing introduced a ban on smoking last summer with mixed results.
It's quite obvious that there are less people smoking on the streets than before.
In buildings, offices, and public spaces, there's a decrease on the number of reports on smokers. The number of reports dropped from 60% to 40%.
Joining me now from Oxford in England is Zhengming Chen, principal researcher on that recent study showing high rates of smoking in China and professor at Oxford University. And from California is Stanford University anthropology professor Matthew Kohrman. He studies China's tobacco use. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Zhengming, you were the principal researcher on that recent study, as I mentioned, on tobacco mortality in China. Now, you have found that two-thirds of men you studied smoke. That is really a startling figure when you look at a country like China. How do Chinese men get hooked on tobacco?
I think our study assessed primarily the consequence of smoking rather than cause of smoking. And the smoking rate has been constantly high over the last several decades. So what really happened over the last few decades, especially since China's opened up from 1980s, is a rapid shift from traditional form of tobacco such as a pipe, wood pipe, and hand-rolled cigarettes to manufactured cigarettes. So our study showed if you start before age 20, you start smoke cigarettes, and if you carry on, and then you have a 50-50 chance to get killed by tobacco, mainly from disease such as lung cancer, heart disease, stroke, chronic respiratory disease.
Matthew, if you look at that period that Zhengming is talking about from the 80s, when tobacco rates or the use of tobacco in China started rising, was there at that point a conscious decision taken by big tobacco companies, American companies, British companies, other European companies to target people in China?
Well, first off, thank you for the opportunity to join you. In response to your question, there were definitely efforts to target smokers, but those doing the targeting were not so much Western tobacco companies that you mentioned. Really, the big player, the sole player in all of this is the State Tobacco Monopoly Administration, otherwise known as China Tobacco in China. More than 95, some estimate up to 97, 98% of cigarettes and tobacco consumed in China these days are produced by subsidiaries of China Tobacco. And China Tobacco has, and its subsidiaries have very actively sought out more smokers and encouraged higher smoking rates. And that's been going on quite intensively since the 1980s.
So, Zhengming, here you have this figure where you have two-thirds of men smoking in China, but less than 4% of women smoke. How do you explain that gender difference?
I think it's very, very interesting phenomena. I think if you look at the old generation of women, I mean, smoking used to be much high. I think what happened is over the last several decades, especially since the 1950s, and there has been tenfold decrease in the uptake rate of smoking among young women. So if you look at people born during 1930s, on average 10% of Chinese women smoked. While for those who were born more recent decades, such as the 1970s, only 1 or 2%. So we don't really know what really going on. It's still largely unexplained. It could be due to limited availability before 1980s, could be due to change of a social norm or full employment since 1950. So we don't really know. I mean, we'll be really interested in looking into that as well. But the real danger is that this could change again. I mean, there's already a sign from various surveys in China suggesting among adolescent women, I mean, a high proportion start to take up smoking again. So we need to be really very vigilant on this as well.
Right, and if we look at that bigger figure, Zhengming, of two-thirds of men who smoke, what are the health implications in China of that?
I think the real danger is, in China, many people don't believe actually smoking is that bad. I think our study, I mean, this is still relatively early stage of tobacco epidemic. So what really happened if you properly start to pick up a smoke, especially cigarettes, there will be a delay of a few decades before you see the full effects of a smoking consequence, such as cancer, cardiovascular disease as well. So our study, which involved two larger cohort studies, 15 years apart. One was conducted during early 1990s, and a second one involving over 500,000 individuals was conducted more recently. So we see actually over the last 15 years, I mean, the smoking risk has actually doubled. The proportion of deaths due to smoking has increased among men from about 10% to 20%. So in 2010, about 1 million of people died from smoking in China. But if the current smoking pattern persisted, it will increase to 2 million by 2030 and probably 3 million by 2050. So this is a very critical period of time for tobacco control.
Matthew, have you come across that as well in your studies, where young men in China don't feel that tobacco is really harmful? I mean, there's been some anecdotal evidence that says that they believe that Asian men are not as seriously affected by tobacco as men in other parts of the world, I guess.
Well, so let me step back. I definitely have observed that many of the people I talk to, smokers in particular, don't think that cigarette smoking is that harmful. The issue of men smoking and women smoking is a really important one to consider. And there has been some studies, historical studies, that have helped us to understand why women in China smoke at such low rates now. There has been a dramatic drop from the early parts of the 20th century to the present day for rates of smoking among women. And the main reason for that, as we understand right now, is that in the early part of the 20th century, there was a movement pushed by national leaders to stigmatize smoking among women as transgressive, as highly associated with sexual transgression in particular. So a good woman, the concept of a good woman in the early part of the 20th century significantly demarcated cigarettes and tobacco overall as something that a good woman would not engage with. I bring this up because what we've seen is that normative shift has not happened among men. But if it could happen among women, and if leaders could be so successful at stigmatizing cigarette smoking among women, it opens the question of, couldn't the same thing be done for men as well? And it's a really important issue right now because of the rates of smoking and the mortality issues that Professor Chen's studies has opened up for us.
Matthew, looking at the other efforts that the government is making to counter the rising rates in smoking, China banned smoking in the capital, Beijing, a huge city with a huge population. That rule went into effect the last summer. Is there anything to show that it's working?
Well, the evidence we have so far is that it's a mixed bag. It looked like initially that there was some response, but at present, recent studies are showing that in restaurants, other public venues, we're still seeing a fair amount of smoking. It's a long road, and I applaud the authorities for pushing through these new restrictions. There's a lot more to go, and there's just a lot of work that needs to be done in following up on the regulations and encouraging people to speak out, because it really requires a big normative shift so that people feel empowered to reach over to the table nearby and to say, excuse me, please, would you not smoke cigarettes in here? It's not permitted, and it's very unpleasant for everybody around you. That's going to take some time.
Zhengming, what about advertising? You know, we find that these days a large percentage of advertising dollars spent on tobacco in developing countries, countries like Zimbabwe, Pakistan, India. What is the situation in China? Is that allowed, and who does that advertising target?
Yeah. I think surprisingly, there's a very limited sort of tobacco advertising. And one stage, there was some in the Formula One promotion, but that was cancelled. I think what really happened, as I mentioned earlier on, there's a monopoly. And actually, back in early 1990s, actually, the government passed a law or regulation to ban direct sort of tobacco advertising. I mean, this is actually not trying to reduce the risk of consumption, but actually try to protect Chinese market, Chinese company from the competition from overseas. But this is actually a quite exciting movement. That's why you see very little tobacco advertising. I just want to come back to the ban on tobacco smoking in public, because that's actually quite an important question. This is a very encouraging step, right direction, but I think that we have to recognize this is actually aimed at protecting non-smoke, not smoke. We have to remember, there are over 300 million smokers in China. I mean, it just makes a little bit inconvenient for them. I mean, most of them will still carry on smoking. So we have to come up with a strategy such as health warning, mass media campaign, and a rapid increase, large increase cigarettes in the price, try to curb the smoking rate or try to encourage people to quit. I mean, these three measures are most effective. Not a ban tobacco smoking in the public. That's useful, but I don't think it's aimed at the wrong population.
Matthew, what is the long-term outlook for tobacco use in Asia? I mean, will there be lots more public health awareness programs, I guess, to bring the number of smokers down?
Well, Asia's a big place, so it's hard for me to speak about all of these individual countries there. The outlook for China. The outlook for China right now. The outlook for China right now is not good. The outlook for China is really quite stark and dark in terms of particularly the mortality and morbidity we're going to be seeing in the next several decades. Now, the actual smoking rates, recent epidemiological studies had shown some decrease in male smoking, but this important new study of Professor Chen's is showing that male smoking rates have not changed much at all in the last 10 to 20 years. Women's smoking rates have gone down a little bit overall, so we're not seeing much of a shift. China is becoming the tobacco superpower of the world. It's producing far more cigarettes than any country in the world. China alone is responsible for producing now over 40% of all cigarettes in the world, largely consumed by Chinese smokers. And we really need to figure out ways to step up if this is an issue that we feel is important, as I certainly know Professor Chen and I do.
Zhengming, is that your view as well, that it's going to be still a very tough job to get people to stop smoking or not start at all?
I think, I'm still hopeful. I think in our study we also see the slightly high proportion of smoker cessation, and now compared with the 15 years ago, the two big studies. But I think we also have to recognize that a very high proportion of smoking cessation is due to ill health. So sometimes it's already too late. So we do need to get the message across, because in China there are a lot of misconceptions about smoking. For example, they said once you have started, you should not stop because it will break up your biological balance, lead to increased risk. This is actually completely wrong. Our study suggests if you stop voluntarily, and then within 10 years, your risk will probably return to never smoke. So that's actually very important local evidence.